to order. Good evening. Good evening. I'd like to call our board meeting to order and ask the treasurer to take a seat. Thank you, Mr. Treasurer. Please call the roll.
President Baker.
Present.
Mr. Brown. Here. Vice President Cole. Here. Ms. Gibbs. Ms. Hudson. Mr. Peretti. Here. Ms. Reyes. You have a quorum, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Treasurer. And I would like to ask State School Board member Antoinette Miranda to come to the podium and lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. Everyone, please be upstanding.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. All right, what I'd like to do now, thank you, Board Member Miranda. What I'd like to do now is review our agenda. So we will try to keep this meeting short for a couple reasons. Yom Kippur starts this evening, so we want to be sensitive of anyone who may be observing that. Also, the board will be continue its process this evening of interviewing semifinalists for the superintendent position. So having said that, we do have public speakers tonight, so we will hear public comment. We will then hear from the Office of the Superintendent, Internal Auditor, Treasurer, if they have reports. We will then take up a couple board matters, including a special recognition, after which we will contemplate our consent agenda, after which the board will recess into executive session. So, and also, if there's no objection, I would like to, actually, we'll get to that in just a minute. Mr. Treasurer, would you please call the roll on adopting the agenda as presented?
I will, just as soon as I have a motion and a second.
Oh, that's a good idea.
Yes,
Would someone, thank you. All right, I knew I was forgetting something. Mr. Treasurer,
it's okay.
I thank you.
That's why I'm here. President Baker.
Yes.
Mr. Brown. Yes. Vice President Cole.
Yes.
Mr. Peretti. Yes. That motion carried.
All right, thank you very much. Now, what I would like to do is, if there's no objection, move item 7.1 up. This is a resolution honoring Jennifer Laplace as the 2019 State Board of Education District 6 Teacher of the Year. And so if there's no objection, I would like to ask her to approach the podium along with State School Board member Dr. Antoinette Miranda. Please approach the podium. And let's give them... Thank you very much. So, Board Member Miranda, would you like to say a few words?
It really is a pleasure to be able to give her this award. And as I was telling her, one of the things I was really impressed with is that we talk a lot about our teachers bringing the outside world into the classroom. And one of the things I was impressed with is that she does that without a lot of resources. She was very innovative in the things she did. I was really impressed by a letter that was from a parent who said that every one of her kids was in her classroom. And I think that says a lot. And I think even a student actually wrote a letter for her. You know, I think she was just really amazing teacher, and I'm just thrilled that we're able to honor the really hard work she does. But I think the other thing is that Columbus City can really be proud of the amazing teachers they have. I don't think we oftentimes get the credit for that. And so I think she's just one of those teachers that proves that there are some amazing teachers in Columbus that go above and beyond to get their kids to be successful. So I'm going to do one of Ms. Gillison's quote, because I think this is what she does. She empowers her students, not enables them. So, yeah.
Thank you.
So thank you for that. What I'd like to do now is move the resolution, item 7.1. I'll just read a part of it. It is rather lengthy. Resolution honoring Ms. Jennifer Laplace as the 2019 State Board of Education District 6 Teacher of the Year. whereas she has worked as a teacher in Columbus City Schools for 20 years, currently at Centennial High School, and whereas she demonstrates a dedication and desire to help her students reach success, pushes her students to put forth their best effort in developing their own historical thinking skills, encouraging them in their journey to achieve this goal, maintains a passion for teaching her students the social sciences, and constantly seeks to improve her social studies instruction with creative best practices and new strategies, whether it be data trends, state legislation, or advocating for positive changes in education. As a valued leader and a member of the Student Learning Objectives Committee, which works to directly help other educators set goals for instruction, spearheaded an additional TBT, teacher-based team, to address the needs of incoming freshmen based on research-based evidence that the freshman year is pivotal in a student's high school success and graduation. Whereas her role and presence on the freshman team have helped to create a culture of learning that has had an impact school-wide, where she's dedicated and loyal to her students and coworkers and is a constant agent for social justice. And there's a lot more. Now, therefore, be it resolved that the Columbus City Schools Board of Education hereby recognizes and honors the hard work and dedication of Ms. Jennifer Laplace on behalf of the students and families of Columbus City Schools, and be it further resolved that the board recognizes and salutes her selection as the 2019 State Board of Education District 6 Teacher of the Year. So I have moved, and is there a second?
Second.
Moved and seconded. Colleagues, would anyone like to say any brief comments? Mr. Peretti?
Just thank you. This is just part of our job up here, and I just want to thank you for all those kids that are going to one day look back and remember you and remember all the work that you did, all those lives that you've changed, and all those moments that they're going to have in the future, just looking back to the work that you did and help them. So just thank you for that work. We don't get to do it enough, but thank you so much.
Mr. Brown?
Yes, and just one more opportunity to congratulate and to thank you, but to use the opportunity to thank all of the wonderful teachers in our schools. I know you're representative of many, many very fine teachers that are reaching kids and making a difference in their lives. So thank you.
Mr. Vice President, would you like to share any remarks?
I thank you, of course, on behalf of the board, and in addition to that, for your work with developing teachers, for your work with contributing to best practices that you distribute throughout the entire district. I think that speaks phenomenally to you, not only as an educator, but as a leader. So thank you so much for your contribution to the classroom and to so many instructors in the classroom.
And Mr. Treasurer, please note the arrival of Board Members Reyes and Hudson. Board Members Reyes and Hudson, we are contemplating item 7.1, which we moved up to recognize one of our teachers, Ms. Laplace. So we have a motion that has been moved and seconded to adopt item 7.1. And Mr. Treasurer, are you prepared to call the roll? Please do.
Mr. Brown?
Yes.
Vice President Cole?
Yes.
Ms. Hudson?
Yes.
Mr. Peretti?
Yes.
Ms. Reyes?
Yes.
President Baker?
Yes.
Motion carried.
Thank you. Ms. Laplace, would you like to share a few comments?
First and foremost, it is a pleasure to work for Columbus City Schools every single day.
All right.
I grew up I grew up on a small island in the middle of the Caribbean, and I moved here to Columbus, and it is just the most amazing place to live on the planet. My students, I decided to go into urban education, knowing nothing about urban education, and it has been a joy and a pleasure working with the people and the students and the families and the community in Columbus City Schools. The people that I work with are some of the most amazing and talented and educated people on the planet. And my students are the loves. My kids, every day I go in, I'm sorry, I'm nervous. Every day I go in and a student asked me yesterday, and I think this sums it up, why do you make a fool of yourself every day? Because I was singing a song. I sing lots and lots of songs. And I said, because it makes you laugh. And that is what our school is about. This is what our district is about, educating our students. And it, like I said, it is a joy and a pleasure to work for Columbus City Schools.
Thank you, Ms. Laplace. One more round of applause. And I would like to ask you to join us right up front here. We're going to take a photograph, Board Member Miranda as well, and Ms. LaPlace, anyone who may have joined you here this evening who you may want to have in the photograph, please ask them to come right up front. Thank you all for helping us to honor Ms. LaPlace. And Ms. LaPlace, you and anyone who's with you here, please feel free to leave at this time if you'd like to, but you are definitely welcome to stay. Yes, congratulations. Thank you so much for being here. All right, let's move then into public comment. And so we do have speakers this evening. And I will go over the rules of addressing the board. Each of you will have 4 minutes to speak. I'll call your name. I'll ask you to come to the podium. There will be a timer that you will see. And I really must ask that when your 4 minutes have concluded, that you conclude your remarks, just because those are our rules, but also because we're trying to move quickly through tonight's meeting. So I'll call your name and say the topic and requested board action, and then I'll ask you to come right on up to the podium. Raymond Valentine is our first speaker. Topic is discrimination. Board action: understand there is discrimination in the school and address it. Mr. Valentine, are you with us this evening? All right, please approach the podium. Thank you for being here this evening. You have 4 minutes. You may begin when you're ready.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, President, Vice President of the Board. My name is Ray Valentine. I am the uncle of a Columbus Public School student. He's a special student, not only to me, but in life in general. He has Down syndrome. He attends a local high school. I know I'm not supposed to give the name of it, but I want it to be known. He tried out for the cheerleading squad last spring. He spent several days there during the clinics and the tryouts, was congratulated by several members of the faculty on making the team. We were told that we would receive an envelope in the mail during the summer that would have the information we needed for him as far as pricing and what would be expected of him throughout the cheerleading season. Didn't happen. We tried to call several times, didn't get any response. First of the school year started, called the school. First person I got hold of was the cheerleading coach. She advised me at that time that my nephew was not on the team. And I said, why? She said, because I removed him from the team. I said, why? She said, because it's my team. He doesn't fit the image that I want to portray with my team. I said, what is the image? Is it because he's biracial? Is it because he's openly gay? Is it because he has Down syndrome? Why? What is the reason you took my nephew off of this cheerleading squad? Her reply to me was, I do not have any background dealing with special needs children, therefore I took him off of my team. I said, you don't have the right to do that. She laughed and said, I make the final decision. This is not a laughing matter. This is a child that has worked his butt off to try and get these cheers down. He may not be perfect, but none of them on that team are, and none of us in this room are. He put forth his effort, even at home during the summer, to work on these cheers for her to do this to him. I get hold of the principal. He tells me that he will contact the athletic director. Well, the athletic director and the cheerleading coach are best friends, and, well, we know how that goes. Nothing happened. However, I made a post on the high school's Facebook page explaining what happened, and I had a huge outpouring of support come in. And I had the vice principal of the high school contact me, and she told me this was not going to happen, that my nephew was going to be put on this team, and she made that happen. His first game that he cheered was against East High School. However, the head coach is still fighting it. She does not want my nephew on this team because he doesn't fit her image. Can any of you tell me what the image is supposed to be? Because this is a bunch of kids that are supposed to be supporting their high school and showing school spirit, and she wants to shoot him down because he doesn't fit her image. I would like to know what her image is. The cheerleaders are there with no uniforms. He's as coordinated as the rest of them. Just because he requires special education doesn't mean that he's different than the rest of the kids. He had a right to be on that team, and she didn't have the right to take him off of it. And I want the board to be aware of this, and I hope at some point you guys ask for her resignation or just fire her, because that's exactly what needs to be done. She's a bully. She has threatened the other children that if they comment on my post, they won't be cheering at the games. You can't do this. This is unacceptable behavior from anyone that's teaching our children. And as alumnus of this school, I'm not happy, and this can't go on. This has to stop immediately. On even just for him, there's hundreds of other children in this school district that have special needs. How many of them are being discriminated against?
Thank you, Mr. Valentine, for taking the time to come down and share that information with the board. We do appreciate it. Are there any clarifying questions from board members? If not, I might ask that Ms. Gillison follow up with him. Thank you very much. Have a good evening. Thank you. All right, let's move on to our second speaker, Mr. Charles Tennant. His topic is the Afrocentric School. Board action, discuss the pyramid. Good evening, Mr. Tennant. Thank you for being here. It's good to see you.
Good evening, Mr. Brown, Mr. Cole, members of the board, Dr. Stanford, Mr. Treasurer, and everyone who is here. I am proud to tell you at this time that the pyramid will be done pretty soon. I don't know exactly when, but it's going to be completed. I want to thank Dr. Stanford, this lovely young lady here, who has been so supportive of Mrs. Marie Stockert and Mrs. Peg Clary in the back, so it will be done. But I have something else I want to talk to you about, and that's about developing a connection with the community. A farmer, an experienced farmer, when he plants a corn seed, he puts it in the ground about 2 inches, and he nurtures that corn kernel. And that kernel will eventually develop, create roots, a stem, and leaves. And by doing that, it creates a connection. It'll create 10 corn cobs. The inexperienced farmer will take the corn kernel and just put it on the ground and just leave it. The experienced farmer will make sure that the weeds and pests are taken away and produce 10 corn cobs that will produce 10,000 corn kernels. In a school district, it should have a connection like a golf club. I am a golfer, and before you can swing a golf club, you have to have connection with your hands, with the handle, which is connected here with an iron, and you swing it, and you get a connection, and you hit the ball. We need to develop strong connections with Mayor Ginther, with businesses in the city of Columbus, because what we're doing is not working. We need to also create programs for parenting education and for other activities for parents. If we have a budget of, let's say, $700 million, I don't see why 1% of that money could not be utilized for parents. I was in Arkansas some time ago, and they had great parent participation, which eliminated a lot of the discipline and other issues that they had. So I'm saying, if you want to get this F off of the record and improve things that we do in school, decrease discipline, then you should look at taking some of the budget and utilize it for parenting education and like GEDs and other things, and not in one specific place, but all over the district in certain spots. And I'm asking you to do that, or else it's not going to work. I worked with some parents not long ago over at Walnut Ridge High School, and their kids had not passed the proficiency test. And I took 21 of them, and working with parents, everybody passed. I've taken 216 kids in this district, and every one of them have passed the proficiency test. And I did that by utilizing the coordination and the connection with parents. And that's so important. It has to be more than PTA and PTO, and parents should be involved in teachers' meetings and everything else that they do in these schools to create a positive environment. These kids are geniuses, and they can do great things, but it's up to you to develop and utilize some of this money to create these programs to bring parents into the schools. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Tennant. Are there any clarifying questions for Mr. Tennant? Thank you very much. Thanks for coming down tonight, and our best regards to your wife as well. Thank you, sir. Thank you. Now, our next speaker, yes, and you do have a nice swing. Very nice swing. Our next speaker is Ed Pollack. Now, his topic, the F grade is not the school district's fault. Board action, emphasize more the significant responsibility of parents. So, Mr. Pollack, welcome.
Yes, good evening, President Baker, Vice President Cole, Treasurer Horick, Internal Auditor Smith, and members of the board, and Interim Superintendent Dr. Stanford. I was kind of, can you hear me? I was kind of shocked with the Dispatch headline last Friday, which said, report gives city schools F. Now, that may be true. There's a lot of ways they could have reported the same thing. If I wanted to slam a local school district, that would be a great way to do it. You can report the truth, however, lead with the basic criteria. And that is the number of districts, for the most part, with the highest number of those receiving government assistance or having a less than normal and average parental background. I don't know, should use the same criteria. If a parent, let me talk about teachers, for example. You as teachers and members of the board and administrators, certification is the same throughout the state, whether you teach in New Albany, Dublin, Columbus, or wherever. Teacher goes to college 4 or 5 years, accumulates a debt of $80,000 to $100,000, and they truly want to help people to, having borrowed that amount of money, to pay it back and to report every day. That you have to have a love for kids and want kids to succeed. Unfortunately, poor students are absent at a far greater rate. Homework today is so yesterday. The phone is so in that it must be with the student all the time. And oh yeah, schoolwork, well, in one sense, are you kidding? There are 168 hours in a week. If your son or daughter is present every day, and most of them aren't, you're there 30 hours. Now that leaves 138 hours that they're with parents. That means that parents determine the TV time, the play time, the phone time, all the privileges. That's a parental responsibility. In today's world, 30 hours a week simply won't do it. Federal grant money helps, but I got to tell you, teachers have a stressful job and do a remarkable job dealing with the challenges over which they have no control. The local paper needs to stress the parental role more. We can't do it by ourselves. 30 hours compared to 138, that just doesn't get it. I don't care what trade, wherever you go, whatever you learn to do, you simply have to have more time to get the job done. And then, of course, the dispatch criticizes. In one sense, we're working with one arm behind our back, because in so many instances, unfortunately, quality parents, caring parents are not providing, as Mr. Tennant indicated, are not providing the kind of helps needed for their children to succeed. I want to thank you for your endless effort, for the Columbus City Schools, as your contribution, and to the city as a whole. Your job is tremendously long, tremendous pressure, and oftentimes goes unappreciated. You remember when the kids don't do well, it's your fault. Okay. Sincerely, thank you. Questions?
Thank you, Mr. Pollack. So some of you may know Mr. Pollack is the father of Principal Routsong. He is also a former principal himself. So thank you for your service to our district and your continued service. Because I know you're still engaged.
Right.
Are there clarifying questions for Mr. Pollack? Hearing none, thank you very much. Thank you. Have a good night.
And I go back to the dispatch. Darn it, it's like they could say that there's a direct relationship between household income and success in schools. There are a number of ways to say it.
The dispatch reporter is here. Go talk to him, Mr. Pollack.
I was hoping they would be.
You give him what for? Thank you. Thank you. All right, our final speaker is Jerome Ferguson, and his topic is Keeping Marion Franklin a High School. Board action requested, keep Marion Franklin a high school. Mr. Ferguson, are you with? Good evening.
Good evening, President Baker, Vice President Cole, Treasurer, Interim Auditor, members of the Board of Education, and Interim Superintendent Dr. Stanford. Good evening to all of you. I'm here this evening because of the proposed changes that you will be voting on in November with regards to particular to high school, proposal number 5 on the south side of Columbus. At that meeting, and one of the Pride Inside schools, I guess we can't say the high school name, but I'll say the Pride Inside of Southfield Community. A number of people attended that. I was disappointed and mad that our elected officials, each one of you on this board, were not there. And that's all I'll say about that, because I'm usually not disappointed with this board. But with the magnitude of that event, I think y'all should have been there. Superintendent, Interim Superintendent, thank you for being there. I would like to go on and say the proposal that is out there is to take one of the high schools and turn them into a middle school. I am here to say that the proposal says the school that was founded in the 1900s should be the high school. That school is landlocked. That school will not serve a purpose, not currently or in the future, for economic growth, or it's landlocked. There is no growth. It cannot provide a student at that school the full range and equal opportunity that other schools have as a high school experience. What I am here to propose, if you have to make one of those schools a high school, the Pride Inside of the Southfield Community that was founded in 1953 has the opportunity. It is not landlocked. It has the opportunity for growth. It's an opportunity for space economic development in that school. You can increase your curriculum in that school. That school is the pride of our neighborhood. Not only that, it also lets you know that that school brings economic development. Right now, 4 schools have been closed, 2 middle schools and 1 elementary school has been closed in our area. And now we're thinking of moving one of our Pride Inside schools to a middle school. I think that is not the right choice, and I pray that in November that you will change that proposal. I think the 1953 school, Pride Inside of Southfield, should stay a high school. You have more expansions at that school. You don't have it at the school from the 1900. You will lose value. You could increase the curriculum there. You could the land growth is there. You have another school that is right there as a library, and we don't know the future of that school, but you can expand there. There's many people in that school that came out of that school that taught auto mechanics that now own their automobile shops. You can, in the technology in the automobile industry, the economic growth in solar power or global warming education can start at that school. You have the room to expand, and you could also give those students over there an opportunity that they wouldn't have going to the other school that was built in the 1900s. Please keep in mind the comments that were shared at that meeting that you did not attend. I pray that you read each and every one of them. I ask that you post them and make that decision wisely. I say this because of this. The high school on the south side has the space and the room for growth, not only for today, but tomorrow, but for the future. It could be one of your finest, newest campuses in the city of Columbus. Right now, when you take a high school, most areas in the suburbs and everything, if you have a high school, economic growth is built around that. If you take that from the south side right now, the Southfield community, you can bring the value down. The other schools that's in your proposal, they got economic growth. They're all downtown. You got a hospital that's nationally known that's building right in that area. They're not going to lose no value. The other ones are going to areas that don't have the economic growth. It would be a disservice not only to the citizens of this city, but to the school board and the students that you serve. Please keep in mind the benefit of keeping the 1953 high school Pride Inside in the South community is better than keeping it a high school than the one that was built in the 1900s. Please consider that when you have that vote, and please consider those comments that were made at that meeting.
Thank you.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much for being here, Mr. Ferguson. We appreciate you taking the time to be here. Are there any clarifying questions from my colleagues? The only thing I'll share, Mr. Ferguson, is that regrettably that evening the board was engaged in another meeting, but we did hear that feedback from our community that we need to have a representative of the board at important community meetings. So in fact, I assigned Board Member Gibbs to attend an important community meeting that we have right now. That's why she's not here. So I appreciate that feedback.
Well, thank you for that. Thank you again for the opportunity. I'm a graduate of that school. My son is. My neighbor's son is. My daughter was a graduate of the school, the lady you just honored. I support Columbus Public Schools. Don't destroy that community. Think wise of your counsel. Your data supports what I shared with you tonight.
Thank you, Mr. Ferguson. Good evening. And that concludes public comment this evening. We'll move on to item number 4, which is the report from our interim superintendent. Dr. Stanford?
Thank you, Mr. President.
You're welcome.
Members of the Board of Education. This will be a very short report this evening. And before I go too far into the report, I'd like to again thank, even though she's not here, I just want to have it on the record, to thank Dr. Miranda for sponsoring and supporting Ms. Laplace for her recognition as District 6 State Board of Education Teacher of the Year, and also want to thank Ms. Laplace for all the great work she is doing with our students, and for being a shining example of the type of teachers that we have in Columbus City Schools. She and the rest of our teachers truly embody the spirit of success that we have in Columbus City Schools. And so with that, I will go to the main part of my remarks. As you are all aware, the local report card was issued by the state of Ohio last week. While our administrative team continues to analyze the data behind the scores, we would like to take a deep dive into the data with the Board of Education. As a result, our administrative team is recommending to the Board of Education a series of board work sessions to be held this fall. The work sessions will allow us together to provide a deeper dive into the various components that make up the local report card, as well as their implication for the district. This is our core business, educating students, and we need to spend some quality time together diving into this data and dissecting it to fully understand it so that we can provide the direction that we need moving forward for our parents, for our students, and for our community as a whole. We would, as an administrative team, would appreciate your thoughts and input as a Board of Education to this recommendation and provide us with your guidance as to how we can move forward so that we may plan accordingly as a leadership team to provide that deep dive. So please share your thoughts and reflections on this request and this recommendation to Dr. Roush over the next week so that we can begin planning and provide this type of deep dive that is needed of the report card. And so with that, Mr. President and members of the board, thank you very much. And at this time, I conclude my remarks.
Thank you, Dr. Stanford, and I appreciate the brevity of your report this evening, knowing that we're trying to stick to a tight schedule. And seeing no questions for Dr. Stanford, we'll move on to the Internal Auditor. Madam Internal Auditor, have you anything to share with the board this evening?
I don't have a report, but I first of all want to apologize for my tardiness. My calendar did not get updated to show the meeting starting at 5 o'clock, so that's what happened. And I do not have a, thank you. I do not have a report, but I would like to just mention that Audit and Accountability is meeting next Thursday at 3:30 in the Cabinet Room.
Thank you very much. And Mr. Treasurer, have you a report for the board this evening?
As a matter of fact, I do.
Very well
So,
then.
thank you, President Baker and members of the board tonight. I'm here to present to you the monthly financial report as was reviewed by the Finance and Appropriations Committee last Wednesday. And I say Wednesday because we've altered our meeting schedule to Wednesdays to accommodate several of the four new ad hoc, or not ad hoc, ex officio, non-voting members of the committee to accommodate their schedule. So we met last Wednesday to talk about the July and August report. We began the meeting with a discussion of the spending plan or the cash flow plan for the year and some of the assumptions underlying that. I explained that the plan for revenues is based upon the May forecast, and we may or may not, but we'll certainly discuss whether or not we change that plan based upon what we hear in the October forecast coming up in the next few board meetings. The expenditure side is based upon the original appropriation resolution that was adopted by the board for fiscal 19, and that's all part of the ongoing budgeting process that we have where we have the departments put together a 5-year budget plan. The plan calls for $922 million in revenue and $915 million in expenditures, so we expect that our cash balance will likely grow by approximately $7 million from $191 million at the beginning of the year to $198 million at the end of the year. And as you can see by the graph, that cash balance will cycle throughout the year, primarily driven by property tax collections and their cyclical nature. So year-to-date through the month of August, revenues are up $30 million. Don't get excited about that because most of that is explained away by timing. 1 month of timing in a couple of the categories. And expenditures are running about $4.6 million under. Again, all of that through August. In the revenue categories, property taxes, we have received settlement. Property taxes are up about $7.7 million versus the cash flow plan, and there's of that really only about $2.6 million is what I would call a real variance. The other $5.1 million is due to how the plan was put together, and very quickly I'll just tell you that when we developed the total amount for the year, we forecasted or estimated based upon settlement period by settlement period. I then aggregated those two numbers and spread it based upon a historical collection pattern. And I admitted to the committee that that second step I probably shouldn't have done because what that did was reduce the year-to-date plan for this settlement period by about $5 million, but it increased the settlement for March by about $5 million. And so I anticipate that we'll see just a flip-flop of that come March. So really the variance, had I left it as what I originally estimated, the variance would be about 1.1% or $2.6 million, much closer to be on target. In the state aid category, we're very much, while we're $2 million over on plan, that's likely to be a timing variance month to month. As I reminded the committee for a while, we run on last year's numbers when it comes to the calculation. That will be updated probably in October and November. However, I am able to look at the August number 2 payment and what the state says we should receive versus what we had in the May calculation, and we're within $200,000 of those two numbers. The forecast had $352.9 million. We have $353.1 million in the August payment calculation, so they're within $200,000. So that's very much on target, and I'm very satisfied with that. Most of the other revenue variances all had to do with timing. The property tax allocation, we received it in August. This is the rollback and homestead exemption payment we get from the state. That was received in August, 1 month ahead of plan, and that we anticipated it for September. So when you look in the management discussion analysis and notes and graphs there, you'll see how that will work itself out next month. I'm estimating to be within about $128,000 of the plan, which is almost $18 million. The other items that had variances, all other revenues, about $2.5 million ahead of plan, primarily due to investment income beating estimates and the property tax payments, what we call pilots payment in lieu of taxes coming in. Both, we tend to be very conservative with those. I can't forecast interest rates into the future. Don't want to place a bet on that. And the payments in lieu of can come in at various times throughout the year. So those consistently run ahead of plan, and that's the way we like that to occur in that category. Other financing sources, ultimately about $1.5 million favorable, but there were three pieces to that. Transfers in, about $2.9 million of transfers in was received in August but planned for September. So that'll work itself out next month. Advances in were planned at $10.5 million. They actually came in at $6.7. So that is a realistic, that won't be covered. That's a $3.8 million unfavorable variance. But to cover that, or to compensate somewhat for that, during this period, July and August, we received a $2.4 million refund of county auditor and treasurer fees. As you might recall, this occurred about 3 years ago, back in fiscal 15. The amount was about $2.1 million. So while we don't plan on it, because I'm not sure that we can count on it, but the county auditor will go in and look at his real estate assessment fund and decide that he has funds available that are, I don't know whether we call it a surplus or not, but certainly he issues a refund. So that $2.4 million was unanticipated in our forecast and plan, and that came in during this time period. All in all, once that timing variance works out, this will represent about a $3.8 million under plan variance due to those advances in being less than we had originally projected. That's it on the revenue side. When we get to expenditures, you'll see the personnel starts off the year like we ended the year and have been pretty consistent in this. We're running under plan about 7%, about $6.2 million. July and August represents run-out payments on last year's contracts. They earn the vast majority of employees earn the contract from September to May, but they get paid throughout the year. So July and August are run out of last year's contracts. The new contracts and wage increases will begin to be reflected in payroll in September. So when we see those results, we'll have a better idea as to whether or not this cash flow plan is on target with what the salaries and benefits will be for this fiscal year. Purchase services, charter, school payments, deductions, supplies, materials, very close to plan for this 3-month period. All of them under plan. Purchase services about $280,000 under plan. Charter schools coming in about $233,000. under plan, and then supplies and materials just $75,000 under plan. So much better than we experienced last year thus far, and we've tried to make some adjustments to get that plan better in line with our actual expenditure patterns. When we look further to in the other expenditure category, capital outlay is one item that, while it's running above plan by about $500,000, we have in the plan 100% of the appropriation, but we also have a little over $1 million in carry forward purchases that may in fact reach fruition during the year. So we'll just watch this throughout the year, but the exposure is about $2 million with about a $1 million plan. So not a significant variance, but we just watch the appropriation and see how our spending goes. Other objects, which are county auditor and treasurer's fees, it is on plan because we got the settlement, and that was planned for and did occur in August. It's on plan at about a $312,000 favorable variance or under plan. Other financing sources that transfers out and advances out, this activity is a timing issue. It was anticipated in September but was executed in August. And that does it for variances here. So I think expenditures are very much on target. Revenue, the vast majority of the 30 million variance is a timing issue. And so at least through the first 2 months, I think we're pretty much on plan, and we'll see what happens in September when we start September and October when we get better data from the state, and then we see how our current contracts are being paid out. That concludes my report on July and August.
Mr. Treasurer, are there any questions or comments? Treasurer's report this evening. Thank you very much, Mr. Treasurer. Let's move on to board matters. So we said that this evening we would discuss our 4 upcoming retreats that we have planned. And so Dr. Rausch, who I'll ask to approach the podium, has been kind enough to do some groundwork for us on potential facilitators. You all received a memo from him. He has been kind enough to provide you with another copy of that this evening, and I'd like for you just to quickly go through it if you could, Dr. Rausch.
Thank you, President Baker, Vice President Cole, members of the board. Before you this evening, I also gave you another copy of that memorandum, but I presented 5 different options for you to consider. Option 1 really looked at an education focus, but with multiple facilitators. The recommendation would be to engage Michael Casserly, who's the Executive Director of the Council of Great City Schools. He's got great experience working with urban boards of education. He's well respected nationally, and most importantly, I think perhaps some of our discussion is that he does it gratis because it's part of our membership in the Council of Great City Schools. There's no additional charge for his services. That he can only do the dates, however, in 2019 that you had, which would leave us with another, kind of that October 30th date. Of course, the fastest approaching date. There I made the recommendation that Deborah Keys with Perkins Consulting, she also has a great deal of work with urban boards of education, so you have that education kind of centric approach. Her rate is fairly reasonable at $1,650. If you went with just one single facilitator, in case that was important to you, then I would recommend Kathy Lasota. She was the most economical. She has done work with you before, while not exclusively having worked with urban boards of education. She has done work, certainly when she was with the Ohio School Boards Association, from which she retired. She is familiar with that work. If you're okay with kind of a general board approach as well as an education-focused approach, then there are a couple of others. Again, I would highly recommend, if you're okay with multiple facilitators, Michael Casserly for each of those. I think that for all the reasons I already gave. I think if you're then looking for there are a number of other individuals, Professor Froelich, Professor Stolberg, and Professor Nancy Rogers, all at The Ohio State University, would all be good folks who can kind of talk on general boardsmanship, on kind of that general category. And again, if you're looking for a single kind of general board person where if the education, that K-12 centric approach is not as necessary, if that's what you felt, I would go with Professor Emeritus Nancy Rogers from The Ohio State University. She's willing to do it free of charge to us. She has a breadth of experience, but when I did talk to her, she noted, quite honestly, she's not done a lot of work with K-12 education. It's not really her bailiwick. She's happy to assist and be a part of that, but again, you kind of lose some of that K-12 focus that if you went that route. So I highly recommend, my recommendation is you can't go wrong with Michael Casserly, just given his reputation nationally and the work that he's done with urban boards of education. So it really comes down to who we choose, or who you choose, who you direct me to engage for that October 30th date. And again, if the board's desire is to keep that education focus, I would recommend Deborah Keys. And I'll leave it for any questions that you all may have.
Thank you, Dr. Roush. Colleagues, are there, Mr. Peretti?
It's just more of a thought. We're looking at your recommendation to go with Council of Great City Schools to have that education focus retreat. I think that's a great idea, although the problem with looking at October and us getting to work, maybe we should consider some of the other retreats that we needed to get working on. I know we had wanted to have a committee discussion. I know there's a lot of things that have been percolating that we've been talking about in our committee structures, facilities, academics, and monitoring, and things like that. And I think a lot of those would help facilitate some of those further conversations as we get down, to get those focused retreats with Dr. Casserly, maybe in 19. This could sort of set up the conversation and for a first retreat for us to kind of break the ice and go over some things and kind of get used to that process again. Just a recommendation, just sort of my thoughts. Just based off that.
So, Mr. Peretti, then who are you recommending for the October 30th retreat?
I think we should maybe go with something for us to have more facilitated conversation, a general sort of feel about it, as we were looking at the most, you want to make sure that we're getting some work done, but I think that we did want to have a committee discussion at some point. I'm not sure how much, experience some of these consultants have with specifically school committees, but I think it's a discussion that we could talk about as we discuss, what's important do we think to the board when it comes to our work, finances and facilities and audits and those sort of things that, we see as governing. I think it's a good opportunity. And we did want to have discussions about, facilities. How do we look at facilities in the long term? I know it's something that I've been talking about. I know NSDP has been looking at some changes to their charter. And I also know that we've also been talking about an academic committee. And, how do we look at our data with regards to the state report card with those various metrics? What are things that we need to help educate the community on? What are things that we see as problems in it? Things that we can advocate on? Things that we can really start to explain that process? That to me looks like our discussion on, hey, look, what is the board's work when it comes to committee work? I know we wanted to talk about that. It would be, I think, a really good first retreat. And again, these are just my first thoughts.
Thank you, Mr. Peretti. So it sounds like you think the facilitators that we use do need to have that K-12 experience. That would be helpful to us. Board Member Hudson, I believe you were next.
I'm just wondering if for the 30th, so it sounds like, and I do agree that Dr. Casserly probably would be good to have come in, given not available on the 30th. I think we'll probably need to be talking about transition and the committee issues and setting a calendar for 19. My gosh, if we accomplished that, it would be probably a pretty big deal. And so, but I'm wondering, because we've worked with Professor Froelich already, we've established a relationship, rapport, perhaps we have him step in, continue to work with us on that, and then we would build and then lay the groundwork for Dr. Casserly in 19.
Yeah, that's not bad. Mr. Brown?
Yeah, that was precisely what I was going to say, and for the same reasons. I think that there are some things that Professor Froelich has learned and observed, and I think that he can provide us some additional value on some issues that really do need attention. And then next year, with Dr. Casserly, attend to the more specifically education-related matters.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. I was going to say, before I go back to Mr. Peretti, I'll offer my other colleagues an opportunity to speak. Dr. Deborah Keys is someone who's ran NSBA Cube for some time, so she is, I think, uniquely qualified. So I do think we might want to consider her as well for the October 30th retreat, which is in your memo, option 1. Board Member Reyes, did I see your hand up?
Sure. So So I have kind of a comment and a question for the October 30th. So we've got a lot of work before us, a lot of what we're handling this week. I'm just wondering if there's going to be additional need for us to meet on some of the issues that we're currently dealing with superintendent transition and so forth for the 30th. I believe Dr. Casserly is a good option for continuity and having somebody be consistent. So I didn't know whether we wanted to add one at the end so that he has 4. I don't understand why we only need 4. So having somebody be consistent and having all 4 would be nice.
Thank you for that. I do though agree with what Board Member Hudson said earlier, which is we do have a number of things that it would be very convenient to discuss on October 30th. Some of these potentially follow-up things that you just referenced. We can always ask Dr. Casserly. We can add additional retreats at the end of these 4 that we've already planned. That's a good idea, Board Member Reyes. Sounds like Dr. Casserly, we've got consensus around him for the 2019 dates that we have set as of now. So I think we need to decide, or at least come to consensus around who we do want to have with us on October 30th. Mr. Vice President, have you any quick thoughts on that?
Yes, considering that it is important that, and I'm kind of weighing some things here, but it is important that there is someone who's going to work with us that has considerable experience in the education field and can help us guide through that process. But given that there has been some very intimate space that Professor Froelich has shared with us, it does make a great deal of sense to me that he helped guide us. I think that he helped guide us through some things fairly effectively throughout this process we're engaged in now. I'm okay with Mr. Froelich or Professor Froelich working with us for the 30th.
Are there any other comments, quick comments, Mr. Peretti and then Mr. Brown?
Probably the same. It's the same, and I'll defer.
One of you say it.
All right.
Because Bill Froelich and Nancy Rogers know each other well. They're both at the law school, the Moritz College of Law at The Ohio State University. I would suggest that we at least touch base and ask Professor Froelich about that and whether, in his view, she could lend some additional value to us on that occasion as we're building whatever that retreat is going to be. There's no downside, I think, to exploring that idea with him. I've known both of them. I've known Nancy Rogers for many years, and she's phenomenal. And I know that Mary Jo Hudson also knows how good she is.
Thank you.
Mr. President, again, should Professor Froelich not be available, I'm definitely interested in Dr. Keys. I know that we've both experienced her throughout the country in our work with CUBE and the NSBA. Someone, again, who brings a wealth of experience about urban education and urban boards, someone that I've seen present and support presenters who have dealt with board effectiveness and governance. So I'm certainly amenable to, if Professor Froelich is not available, to be able to work with Dr. Deborah Keys.
And Dr. Rausch, just so we're clear, is Professor Froelich available for the October date?
To President Baker, Professor Froelich indicated he is free for the October 30th date. That was a few weeks ago, so things may have changed. I will reconfirm with him, but he indicated that he would be free for that particular date.
Colleagues, have Board Member Reyes.
So what would Dr. Froelich be covering? Or what is his strength?
Dr. Rausch.
President Baker to Board Member Reyes. His general strength is, right now, I think, is that he knows all of you fairly well. He's worked with all of you. He could certainly do the communication. He could certainly kind of do kind of more of the general piece. But I think if what I'm hearing from you, the board members, and please correct me if I'm incorrect, it sounds like you have a number of things you want to try to get ready for transition. He could probably help kind of guide and facilitate that conversation for you as you have some of those conversations. So I think he's kind of got a more general, broader approach that he can take, especially around communications or engagement, as opposed to it necessarily getting down in nitty-gritty of some of the educational minutia that may come through some further discussions.
Roush, I think we're approaching consensus on the October date. Does anybody have any other concerns they want to share? Board Member Reyes?
My only, not a concern, I just would like to know what we're going to cover on the 30th. So if we're going to do some general board development that is smaller meeting, a shorter meeting perhaps, then that makes sense with Dr. Froelich. If we're going to have a true 2-hour or 2.5-hour retreat, I think there's conversations about Deborah Keys. That's why I asked about the topic and his availability, and making sure that, I think we need to define what the 30th is. I know you want to make consensus, I know you want to move forward, but is this a 1-hour retreat talking about board committees and some of the suggestions that were put here, or are we going to do board development? And if so, then does that take a different person, or are we adding another retreat at the end? So I think it's a combination of, I need to know what it is for that day in order, or unless my colleagues feel like it doesn't matter what it is, and we can just make it something different.
We agreed to is that each of these retreats would be 2.5 hours in length. So that's the timing that we agreed to, Mr. Brown?
Yeah, I was going to say, I think that, oops. I think that we've got more than enough topics to more than fill the time of 2.5 hours that with a facilitator and with somebody leading us with some board development, I think we could make some very good use of the time. It might take something like each of us coming up with those matters that we'd like to address in that kind of a setting. But I'm thinking of matters that don't necessarily require educational expertise as much as general knowledge and skill, and they're matters that we can discuss and figure out among ourselves, but perhaps with the kind of help that Bill Froelich can provide.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. So we do, colleagues, as you know, we do already have a list of topics that we've all provided to Dr. Roush, so he does have those. I do think that it might make sense that we could work with him to further define topics that we'll cover during that first session. And so I think we'll continue to rely on him to help us get to the point we want to be so that we know exactly what we're going to be talking about that night. And so, any other quick comments?
For me, if it is a board, excuse me, if it is a board development related set of topics that deal with us calendaring, that deal with us committee building, and what kind of criteria we want to set around that type of committee, particularly if it's an academic committee. Any number of things that are absolutely education-oriented, I think it would be wonderful to have Dr. Keys guide us through that process and work with us directly hands-on, somebody who has that experience working with boards directly. If it is something that is not board developmental, along the lines of maybe dealing with some things that address this process moving forward in terms of our collaborative work in some sort of way. And I'm trying to say it as gingerly as I possibly can. But if there was something along that line, I think that Dr. Froelich, who has some intimate relation, experience with us, work with us, I think that would make sense.
And that's what I'm thinking.
Board Member Reyes?
The difference between housekeeping or which is our work, getting our work done, I think that's Dr. Froelich. If it's actual true board development from the education perspective, I'd be interested in the other part. That's why I think it's important to decide what that work is as we make the decision for going forward. think talking about committee structure is board development. I would say that we could do that with Dr. Froelich. And I think by the time board members air their concerns and we maybe identify committees to look and see what other boards have done, and I mean, to start that exploration, we probably would be going into session 2 then. So, and then we would have an academic expert to help us guide that in that second step.
Some sense to me, so is it fair to say then we'll work with Dr. Roush to fine tune the topic, but is it fair to say we have some consensus around Professor Froelich and then Dr. Casserly for the 2019 dates, and then we will plan additional dates subsequent to the June 25th, 2019 date that we have planned? Do we have consensus around that?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Dr. Roush, I thank you.
You.
All right, colleagues. Let's move on then. Thank you for that discussion. I appreciate that. Let's move into our consent agenda. Thank you. Is there a motion that we adopt, and is there a second?
Second.
Oh, I beg your pardon.
Review. Be 10.1, 10.2.
Thank you, yes.
I'm not sure, am I out of order?
Let's see. Actually, let's go ahead and make the motion second, and then we'll begin our discussion. All right, is there a motion? There is a motion, and there was a second. Okay, now we are going to begin discussion. You are perfectly well in order. You're commenting on item 10.2 and an amendment.
I missed the fact that it's part of the consent agenda.
Yours, Mr. Brown.
With respect to the consent, to items 10.1, 10.2, these policies are here for second reading, but with respect to one of the policies only, we have a need for a slight amendment. That's policy 6233. And in that policy, we're proposing changing the word citizens to the word families, and also making a slight change to the amenities portion of that to allow for building principals to make that decision at the building level for students, just as they do for those in Title I programs. And I would move those amendments.
Second?
Second.
Moved and seconded. All right, do we want to vote on the amendment?
Ready?
Yes, sir.
Vice President Cole?
Yes.
Ms. Gibbs? Oops, I'm sorry. Ms. Hudson?
Yes.
Mr. Preddy? Ms. Reyes?
Yes.
President Baker?
Yes.
Mr. Brown?
Yes.
That motion carried.
Thank you. Is there any other comment or other questions on pieces of legislation contained within the consent agenda? Mr. Peretti.
Thank you. Just wanted to say thank you for all the donations in our community. 1810, from Whetstone High School PTA, 2 of those, Columbus Crew, the PTO Indianola Middle School, and the cash donation from Donors Choose. Just thank you to the community for all that work. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Mr. Peretti. Anything else on the consent agenda? Mr. Treasurer?
Ms. Hudson?
Yes, although I abstained from 12, I'll give you the list, 12-1, 12-2, 12-3, 14-2, 15-3.
Thank you. Mr. Peretti? Ms. Reyes?
Yes.
President Baker?
Yes.
Mr. Brown?
Yes.
Vice President Cole?
Yes.
The consent agenda passed.
Thank you very much. Board members, do you mind if we skip announcements this evening? Okay, thank you. I do want to quickly, one item, congratulate Cheryl Ward, who could not be here tonight. She has been named exemplary school employee, and Katina Fullen, I don't know if Katina Fullen was able to be here with I Know I Can, who will be recognized tomorrow night at the Ohio School Boards Association Central Region meeting. Katina Fullen has been named Friend of Public Education. So regrettably, the board is unable to attend that meeting tomorrow because we'll be engaged in another meeting. But just wanted to give Cheryl Ward and Katina Fullen recognition and a round of applause. Yes, and I do want to recognize the superintendent. Yes, sir.
Mr. Board President and members of the Board of Education, thank you for allowing me to recognize the newest member to the Columbus City Schools family, and that would be Stephen Andrews, who will become our new fleet manager, and I believe he's got his lovely wife with him as well. So let's welcome them.
Welcome, and thank you for staying through the meeting. And if there's nothing else, I'll ask the Vice President to offer a motion.
Yes, just one quick thing before I offer that.
Yes.
I definitely, because I made a promise, I definitely want to acknowledge Dr. Mark Lomax, who is one of our academes at Fort Hays Arts and Academic High School. He received the 2018 Wexner for the Center of the Arts Artist Residency Award. I want to make sure that we give notice to outstanding educators throughout the district who are being acknowledged by major community partners for the outstanding work that they're doing with our children. He is not here, but we'll deal with that later, but I just wanted to make sure I acknowledged him at least this first time, yeah.
All right, Mr. Vice President? Yes, Mr. Brown? Right.
Just wanted to mention that yesterday was a very significant day in that it was Constitution Day, a very, very important day to recognize and appreciate the work that our forebears did back in 1787, and it's Citizens Day as well. But Constitution has probably never been more important and more critical in our lives than at any time since the Civil War. So it's important for us to recognize that. Thank you.
Lucky to still have that. I hope we keep it. Mr. Vice President?
Yes, Mr. President. It is recommended that the Board of Education recess into executive session per Section 121.22 G1 Ohio Revised Code to consider the appointment and employment of a public employee or official, and Section 121.22 G4 for the purpose of preparing for, conducting, or reviewing negotiations or bargaining sessions with public employees concerning their compensation or other terms and conditions of their employment.
Second, there are actually two items that we'll be contemplating in executive session this evening. If there's nothing else, Mr. Treasurer, would you call the roll?
Mr. Peretti?
Yes.
Ms. Reyes?
Yes.
President Baker?
Yes.
Mr. Brown?
Yes.
Vice President Cole?
Yes.
Ms. Hudson?
Yes.
That motion carried.
Thank you. The board will now recess into executive session. We will adjourn from there without returning to these chambers. Thank you. Have a good evening.